All right, guys, welcome to Bio 100. We're going to go ahead and get right into Chapter 1. This is the nature of science. Your objectives here, these are your main ideas and your pointers for the chapter. I'll mention these every chapter we go into. The best way to study for your exam is use these objectives kind of as your blueprint. So you know that you've studied enough when you can answer all of these objectives in detail correctly without having to refer to any notes. I would highly suggest when you take notes, whether you're reading or taking notes in class, you use your objectives as headers or reference points and take notes under them. So as notes apply to a header, refer them to that as your kind of overarching, like, this is where I'm going to organize them to. Okay. Now, your book goes into a lot of detail about snails. That's just the example the book uses. I don't need you to know a lot about snails. I'm not sitting here asking you to be snail experts. I'm not going to ask you any like specific questions about snails on exams or assessments. They're just the example, so don't worry too much about these snails, okay? All right, so surviving a mass extinction. Thus far, there have been 5 mass extinctions on Earth. If you did the pre-class question, it talks about how we are currently entering the early stages of the 6th mass extinction. The previous 5 mass extinctions have been caused by things like climate change, volcanic eruptions, Big Bang Theory, sea level changes, great floods. But this time it is directly due to human catastrophe. So a lot of you had some really great answers. I know someone said fast fashion, that's a big one. So industrialization, things like that are what is causing this current 6th mass extinction. You have to think about the role that humans play in the world. We love convenience, we are consumers, and think about the Industrial Revolution. If any of you are into history, when the Industrial Revolution came around, you've got things like air travel, train travel, we're driving. People think electric cars are kind of our saving grace, but as time goes on, we see that's not really so much the case. So there's quite a few contributing factors. So logging, farming, mining, a lot of you guys talked about that. People like to wear diamonds. You like your diamond earrings. You like your chains, all that stuff. Mining is horrible for the environment. An alternative, lab-grown diamonds. Exact same composition. For whatever reason, people want to knock it. You've got poaching. Poaching is like trophy hunting. So you see like people hunting elephants and cheetahs and these endangered species for their pelts, their furs, or for their tusks, the ivory. Totally unnecessary. Then we've got road and city expansion. If you're from Hampton Roads, you see they're doing that HRBT expansion. That's a lot of pollution, which goes into our next thing. Pollution is everywhere. It is disgusting. If you look at the snow right now, that's why the snow is turning black after one day. We don't get that pretty white snow that just sits. The snow turns into that ucky, mushy, disgusting color, okay? And then global warming, people think global warming is just, it's 100 degrees in the summer. Global warming is why New Orleans and Florida have snow right now, and Georgia and all of these other places that, shouldn't necessarily be getting inches of snow, but they're getting dumped on. And then another one is the introduction of invasive species. And the rosy wolf snail, which is the snail in your book, is an invasive species. There's plenty of invasive species such as plants, animals, different bugs. And so the issue with invasive species is they are somewhere they're not supposed to be, and they're in that area causing absolute havoc. All right, so we see this with certain bugs. They eat crops. We see this with certain plants. They overgrow things and they tangle up like parasites or choke out the actual plants we want to grow. So in the book, we see scientists are attempting to save certain species that are endangered or that are being attacked by these invasive species. before they go extinct. So easier said than done, but these are the efforts that we can do at this point. So a lot of what we're doing right now is kind of like recon mission. The damage is done, so it's just how can we sort of make it less bad than it already is. All right. So, definition you need to know. Whenever you see these bolded words, these are fair game for an exam. If you go on your Blackboard shell, you do have flashcards under each chapter. So all those bolded words are already made into flashcards for you to be able to review. These bolded words will be on your test. It'll either be multiple choice that you need to match the definition, matching where it'll be multiple words with a definition bank, or you might have to fill in the blank and tell me what the definition is. So you need to know these, all right? When we talk about science, it's a body of knowledge or data that is about the natural world, all right? Evidence-based. Evidence-based. So a lot of you guys, when you were writing your pre-class discussion question answers, you were saying, in my opinion, or I think. When we're dealing with science, we're not talking about opinion. We're not talking about our view, our take, our thought. We're talking about evidence. All right. So we have something to back it up. So refrain from talking about your thoughts or your opinions or your feels when you're having scientific discussion. All right. We're not doing that here. So when you have something based on evidence, how are we getting this evidence? How are we getting these receipts? And the way we do that is through observation, so you can see it, all right, or an experiment. So you're making a situation to create a scenario where things are happening. All right, so here's what science is and what science is not. So it's independent, all right, independent validation and peer review. This is what science is subject to. And the reason for this is because, and maybe the world we live in today might seem a little different because we got people out here doing whatever, but you can't just go around, or you shouldn't just go around saying, oh, well, I have come to this conclusion because I said so. Or I've come to this conclusion because, like, this is what I feel. That's not how that works. You got to have something to back it up. So independent validation and peer review is a checks and balance system, but science, okay? So in, government, you have your three branches. In science, you have validation and peer review, all right? At any given time, anyone can challenge anything that's based on evidence. And we see this a lot with things like, I think the most recent one is eggs, and eggs change all the time. So every few years, people say, oh, you shouldn't eat a lot of eggs. There's too much cholesterol. And then a few years later, they say, oh, you should eat a lot of eggs. They're really good in protein, and the cholesterol is honestly not that bad. So that's a big one. You can challenge these things in science as long as you have, again, the receipts to back it up. And again, science is a self-correcting enterprise. So there's times where people make these, assertions in science, and they're wrong, and they have to correct themselves, or the research that they do corrects itself, okay? And we see this with a lot of experiments with vaccines, with some of these weight loss drugs, and all sorts of stuff, okay? Now, what science can't do is anything that's opinion-based. So when we're talking about morals or anything that is subjective, science can't tell us what's right or wrong, all right? We see this with people's stance on abortion or with people's stance on blood products, all right? Because people's views on abortion and people's views on if they're going to take a blood product, that could be a personal choice, that could be a religious choice, that could be a family choice, that could be a whole slew of choices. So if they are choosing, hey, I'm not going to do this, science just got to sit there and say, all right, you don't want to do it, can't force you. All right, so that's that. Science cannot address the existence of God, supernatural beings. So people who want to come in and say, oh, science can, talk about aliens and UFOs and stuff. It really can't. It really cannot. That's not what science does. All right. And as we said earlier, science is not opinion based. So when it comes to what's beautiful, what's ugly, What's inspiring, what's lyrical, what's this, what's that. Science is not here to do that. All right. Science is going to tell you what it is and what it ain't. It's not going to tell you any other specifics in between there. Okay. All right. So this next thing is the scientific method. So when we talk about the scientific method, this is a logical process, and this is going to help us learn more about the natural world. All right. So the scientific method, it's not like a set recipe per se, but there are steps that you have to follow, and they're pretty evergreen. As long as you have these kind of basic steps, you'll be good. All right. So the first thing you're going to do is observe. Then you're going to hypothesize. So observe is when you look around, you ask your questions about the natural world or whatever environment it is. When you suggest a hypothesis, you're explaining your observations in question form. All right, so now you're turning things into a question. When you have a question, you need to answer that question. But of course, anytime you have a question, you can sort of predict the answers. Is the stove hot? Maybe it's hot, yes or no. So those are your predictions that you're making to test your hypothesis. Then you're going to design a test, okay? Because it's not enough to assume. You can't have any assumptions in science. So you're going to design a test to test the predictions of your hypothesis. So you're going to test by observation, test by measuring, or you can just design and run an experiment, all right? Once you do that, you analyze your results, okay? After you analyze your results, and analyzing could be collecting data, and it usually is collecting data, whether that's numbers, charts, graphs, whatever it is. All right. The next thing is you're going to support your hypothesis, reject your hypothesis, or modify it and run the system back again. And when you have your hypothesis, a big thing about it is it has to be falsifiable. What this means is your hypothesis needs to be able to be proven wrong. All right. So you can't just make a hypothesis that, oh, I know this is going to be right. You can't just set yourself up for success. You have to make a hypothesis where it could go the other way. It could go the other way. It could go in a way that is unfavorable to what you think is going to happen. Okay, because that's science. As much as you think you can predict, you have to be ready for the complete opposite to happen and be able to roll with that. All right, so that's why we say support, reject, or modify your hypothesis. And then communicate your results. So what good is your result if you don't have anyone to share it with, especially when you're doing really important research, like the research being done on things like sickle cell and cancer and whatnot. If someone's just keeping that all to themselves, that's not helping anybody else. All right. So the way that I like to talk about the scientific method is think about it like you're walking into a club or you're walking into a party or something like that. All right. So the first thing you're going to do, I would think, when you walk up on any spot is you're going to look around. You're going to see what the vibes are. You're going to see, is it dead? Are my homies here? Do I got any haters here? Like, you're going to see, like, what's up? Who's here? Like, what's the, homie to honey ratio? Like, you got to see what's going on. All right. And then that's when you're going to start hypothesizing. Now, if I go into a situation and I see a whole bunch of my people in here, my friends, I'm going to start predicting, okay, I'm probably going to have a good time. I see a bunch of my friends here. I think if I stay, I'm going to have fun. If I see that the spot is full of people I don't know or maybe some people I don't rock with, I'm going to start predicting and saying, you know what? If I stay here, it's probably not going to be good. I don't think I'm going to have a good time. I might get into some trouble. I don't like how this is looking. All right, so that's your hypothesis. That's your prediction. Okay? Now you got to run your experiment. You got to test this out and see. So you can test this out by staying at the party. You could stay, see how the night goes, or you could leave, see how the night goes. You could do either of those things, and you collect your data from that. Now, let's say you stayed and all your friends were there, and you had a great time. You can support your hypothesis. Now, let's say you stayed, all your friends were there, but you didn't have a great time. You can reject your hypothesis, all right? So there's a whole bunch of different ways to do that. And then you come to your conclusion, All right. You get your data. Maybe your data is, oh, I took a whole bunch of pictures because I was having a blast. I got a whole bunch of numbers because it was a lot of people in here that I was trying to rock with. That could be data right there. And then sharing your results. Maybe you posted on Instagram or whatever it is. That is kind of how you can keep the scientific method real simple and apply it to real life. All right. I'm not saying you gotta go out and like use the scientific method, but it is more common than you know. You probably just didn't realize this is what it was. All right. So, quick little Q&A, and when we are in class, I will be asking these questions and expecting y'all to answer them. So, at what point in the scientific method would a scientist decide on the methods that should be used to test a hypothesis? This would be the experimental part. So, what methods? When you're talking about methods, you're talking about the testing, the experiment. Are you just going to observe and watch? Are you going to actually build an experiment and create a sort of test environment? That's when you would decide. How might you explain the process of science to someone who complains that scientists are always changing their minds, and how can we trust what they say or what they do? Now, a few slides back, and I can go back to it. I don't know if I can go back on here, but a few slides back, we talked about how science is ever changing, right? And science is a self-correcting enterprise. So that's one way that you could explain, like, hey, science changes with the times. It's not like this evergreen permanent thing. Another thing you can explain too is within the scientific method, you can support, reject, or modify your hypothesis. So suppose you run your experiment and maybe it worked for a time, but you want to go back and test something again. Maybe you've had more experience, you've got more data, you've got more things that you would like to try on for size. Go back, test them out. That's what that is. All right, so when we talk about observations, okay, this is a description, a measurement, or a record of any object or phenomenon. So when we are observing things, this is what we are seeing. We are not assuming these things, okay? We are not, went forward a little more. We are not assuming anything when we are talking about observations. This is what we can see. It is there. It is what it is. You cannot alter an observation, okay? When we talk about a hypothesis, I know in probably elementary, middle, high school, they told y'all, oh, a hypothesis is a if-then statement. Throw it away. I want you to put it 6 feet under, bury it, who did the body, all that on the if-then statement. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see it. We're done with it. We are in college science, college biology now. We're not doing that, okay? When you have a scientific hypothesis, you have something that is testable, okay, for one. When I say testable, I mean you need to be able to make an experiment out of whatever you are hypothesizing or questioning. Okay, this needs to be something that is objective, not subjective. So we already talked about how science can't determine if something is pretty or if something is cute. So if you come to me with a question like, oh, is that flower beautiful? That is not something that's not a testable hypothesis. Like you can't come to me with that because you might think the flower is beautiful. I might think it's ugly. Vice versa, okay? Another thing, your hypothesis must be falsifiable, all right? So this means, as I said earlier, the predictions that you make can be clearly determined to be either true or false, okay? You cannot set yourself up for failure back to back to back to back, but you also cannot set yourself up for success back to back to back to back. You have to set yourself up for this could go one way or another. And I am here to create an environment where I can accept whatever happens. All right. So let's just not do the if-then statement. Like, just let's not. Okay. I know that maybe that's where you guys started. And if it comes down to it and you need to start with the if-then statement and then modify it into something that is not an if then, I will allow it. But if I'm ever on an assignment asking you to come up with a hypothesis, and you submit an if then statement, it's not going to be pretty, okay? It's not going to be very cutesy. Hiding in plain sight, all right? So a hypothesis can be supported, but no amount of testing, no amount of experimentation, nothing can prove a hypothesis with complete certainty. All right. So in everything that I've been saying, it's always been supporting your hypothesis. You can't prove a hypothesis. All right. You can only support it. And that is why in science, you're able to self-correct, and you're able to come back and change and come back and reassess and come back and retest and do experiments over again. You're not proving anything. You're supporting your hypothesis, and you're supporting it with data. You're supporting it with observations. But things change because our world is changing. We are evolving as people. Things are evolving. We're going through, earth changes, atmospheric changes. So the same standards that existed 100, 200 years ago don't exist now. Okay? Now, everyday advertisements are really good at making scientific claims, and these are exaggerated and often inaccurate. So for anyone who's a marketing major, if you ever go on to have a marketing career and you're probably thinking, when am I ever going to need to know science for marketing or business or whatever? Let's say you go work at like a pharmaceutical company or a health and wellness supplement company like that. Think about this. If you ever look on like vitamins, all right, a tub of vitamins or something like that, all right, you will often see things like supports bone and immune health, things like that. But what I need y'all to understand is that vitamins, and you'll see this on every bottle, this statement has not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. All right? This is on any bottle of supplements or vitamins or anything like that. And that is important because when you have supplements and things like that going into your body, the only way that you can ever guarantee anything they're saying is if the FDA backs it up. All right. So a lot of these claims, I cannot guarantee that this vitamin D3 is going to support my bone and immune health because the FDA does not support it. Now, it's vitamin D3. It's probably going to do what it says based on the ingredients and based on how it's supposed to be taken. I'm not really too worried about this. But you see a lot of these celebrities, making these gummy vitamins and like the apple cider vinegar vitamins and the collagen supplements and all of that. And even with skincare, the alkaline water and all this stuff, a lot of those claims that people are making, if you really read those labels beyond the fact that Kourtney Kardashian or Jennifer Lopez has their face on the bottle, you will see that those products are not worth the plastic they're printed on. All right. So the first question is talking about stating the hypothesis that was in that advertisement in the last slide. And so the advertisement was a woman smoking cigarettes, and it was talking about how the cigarette brand was, the mildest brand on the market. And so, of course, back in the day, the thought was smoking cigarettes was like the thing to do. People really thought there were health benefits to smoking cigarettes. If you guys know anyone over the age of like 80, they'll swear to you that like, oh, I've been smoking cigarettes since I was like 6 and like that's why I'm whatever. But back then, kids smoked cigarettes. Everyone thought it was like a health thing. So the claims on the advertisement, to break it down, have no scientific background to them. There's no scientific testing that can back up that the Lucky Strike cigarette was milder or better for you or anything like that. Okay. These questions kind of need a class setting, so we'll just skip over them. All right. When you are testing your hypothesis, as we said, you can use an observational study or an experimental study. So When you have observational studies, as noted by observational, you are looking, you are observing, okay? So you're not manipulating anything in this study. You are observing what's happening, and from there, you're collecting data. So when you have a descriptive observational study, you're reporting the data or the information that you're finding in nature. So we see this a lot with people who are studying like habits of animals in their natural habitats. So like mating patterns of wild birds, or like when Darwin studied finches in the Galapagos. Like that's a descriptive type of observational study, because he's not sitting there manipulating these finches. You know, he's not going up and like capturing birds and like doing things to them. He's just watching them. Now, when you look for an analytical observational study, now you're looking for patterns in your data, and you're addressing how or why these patterns came to exist. All right, so you can sometimes see an overlap of your analytical and descriptive observational studies, but anything that's going to be analytical, just think about a pattern, think about an algorithm. There's going to be some sort of kind of puzzle, if you will, that you're going to be breaking down. Okay, and so again, another Q&A. If we were in class, these are the Q&As that we'd be doing together. I do 100% expect all of you to participate in these Q&As. Like, I will pose the question, and then at that point, either hands go up or you can call out answers, whatever it is. The first couple weeks when you do answer a question, just say your name as you answer. I will eventually learn all of your names. I'm actually pretty good with names, so keep it up, because your participation points will kind of be tacked on to your test grade as like a little extra, like, you know, salt in there to bump your grade up if you need it. All right. So an experiment is a repeatable manipulation of one or more aspects of the natural world. So an experiment is what is testing your hypothesis. All right. Experiment is the test. Hypothesis is what we're asking. Experiment is how we're answering that. Okay. All right. So a lot of bolded words on this slide. Again, all of your bolded words are already flashcards on Blackboard that you have made for you to study, but you should know all of these bolded words for your exam. Okay. So when you have a variable, these are your characteristics, and these can change. All right, so you have like your independent variable and your dependent variable. These are your two main variables, okay? Independent variable is what the researcher is going to change. The dependent variable is the responding variable. So the way that I like to think about it is the dependent variable depends on the independent variable, okay? That's how I want you to remember it, and you will not forget it that way. The dependent variable depends on the independent variable, like what happens to the independent variable, okay? So if the independent variable is the cause, the dependent variable is the effect, all right? And then there's an example using the snail. So read that. That's a good example. All right. Now, within our experiments, we have what are called controlled experiments, and these are very carefully designed experiments. So when you have a control group, all right, this is maintained under very strict conditions. And when you are in a control group, your independent variable is not changed. So your control group and control, I mean, you hear control, think just very cut and dry. Your control group does not change. And the reason why your control group is important is because it acts as a baseline. Now, your treatment group, all right, this is the experimental group. So it's maintained under the same set of conditions as your control group. The only difference is that the independent variable in your treatment group does change. All right, so control group, nothing changes. This is your baseline, and we like a control group because should anything potentially go wrong, or should anything be a little bit fuzzy-wuzzy, we can look at the control group and say, okay, well, this is baseline. this is kind of what this is what it's supposed to sort of be. So if anything's looking a little too wild, we come back to our control and we say, well, this is where we started. So if we need to start again, let's just wrap it up, go back to our control, and then do the whole process. All right. Now, facts versus theories, okay? When we have a scientific fact, okay, this is direct and repeatable observation of the natural world. And scientific facts and scientific theories, and this can sometimes be tricky for people who are new to science or science isn't really their cup of tea, but please, please, please be able to differentiate these two. And I believe you guys actually have one of the questions in your homework, the smart work that asks you to differentiate facts versus theories. Please read those very carefully. Go back to your notes, go back to your textbook before you do that assignment, okay? When you have a theory, this is a hypothesis that has received enough confirmation through various experiments and investigation by enough people that people are just like, we can't necessarily prove it wrong. We can't evergreen prove it right, but we're just gonna say it's right enough. So that's kind of what a theory is. A theory is right enough. So theory of gravity, theory of relativity, it's right enough. And that's why we call it a theory, okay? Enough people have supported it, but it's not 100% known why. All right, so fact, hypothesis, and theory. These are some good examples. So a fact is that land snails have gone extinct across the Pacific. We know that to be true because they're not there. If you went to the Pacific, very specific islands, you wouldn't see land snails. They're gone. All right, a hypothesis is that an introduced predatory snail, which is that rosy wolf snail, is responsible for the extinction of many native island snails. Now, this is a hypothesis because if you read through the book, you'll see that that's kind of what this big experiment is being formed off of. So that's what they're testing. So that is the hypothesis that these researchers have come up with. Now, theory is that humans have dramatically increased extinctions through their actions, bringing about a sixth mass extinction. Now, we know this is a theory because enough researchers in enough places have done enough experimentation to say, you know what, this is true enough. Now, not every human everywhere is necessarily contributing to this. You've got people who live in remote indigenous areas who, they're sustainably living. You've got people in Arctic tundras who sustainably hunt and sustainably fish. So you can't necessarily say those humans are contributing to what's going on. But enough human beings are that this is a theory that will say it's true enough, so we theorize it. All right, so we talked about why you need a control group. Your control group is your baseline. So you need your control group because should anything go wrong in your experimental group, you come back to your control group and you still have kind of this baseline, this reference point of okay, this is what things should look like. This is where I started out, okay? So what is another example of evidence for the theory of a sixth mass extinction? You guys answered a lot of these in your pre-work assignments. So examples of evidence would be, the ozone layer, how we are having these depletions of the ozone layer. Another thing too is the ocean acidification, which we'll talk about a little later in the class, but essentially it is because of pH changes and because of the ozone layers being affected, the ocean is getting actually fizzy. It's almost getting carbonated at a slow rate, but fish are little, so they are feeling that carbonation more than we ever will. But it's changing things. So if you live in this area, in the summertime, for 2 weeks, they're like, oh, don't swim in the water. There's bacteria in it that could kill you. That's what that is. All right. And then explaining in your own words the difference between a fact, a hypothesis, and a theory. Um, Let me see. I think I'm actually going to have you guys answer that as a pre-class question, so we're going to skip that for right now. All right, so peer review. Okay, peer review is essentially, like I said, the checks and balances for science. So when you have your peer review, it's when several scientists, usually very acclaimed scientists, who did not participate, were not a part of your experiment, so there's no bias, they review your work. And the reason we have peer review is so that people are not coming in just asserting things and saying, oh, yeah, like, this is what it is because I said so. Or, like, you're just not having people doing, like, sneaky pseudoscience. So these reviewers come in and they go over and over and over and over your experiment. They run your experiment. And if there's any concerns or if they need to make any changes, they will go back to the author and they'll say, hey, listen, you need to go fix this, this, and that. Okay? So this gets rid of bias, it gets rid of fraud, and peer review saves lives. Unfortunately, in science, I mean, it's $1 billion industry, and you would think that people would be in this field because they want to help people, but a lot of people want to line their own pockets, and they are willing to do whatever they want. And a really good example is, I can't remember her name, but she started that company Theranos. Now I gotta look it up because it's going to drive me insane. I think her name was like Elizabeth something. She's in jail, or like she was in jail. Elizabeth Holmes. She was a biotech entrepreneur. She went to like Stanford, or like, I don't know. She went to some Ivy League. She dropped out. She supposedly invented this blood testing company called Theranos, but the company was fraudulent. So she was, testing people's blood, saying like, oh yeah, I can test like one drop of blood and like find all these diseases and cure these people. But she wasn't, and people died because of her sham of a company, and so she went to jail. And this is why things like peer review are a massively huge deal, because people like her, unfortunately, exist and do shady stuff. So there you go. Real life application. All right. Biological hierarchy. When you guys see the chart for this, you're probably going to freak out and be like, we have to know that? You do. You do have to know it. It's really not that bad. It's actually quite interesting. I feel like you guys will love it. Or maybe I just love it, but you do need to know it. So it's the many levels that life can be studied at. It starts very small and simple and gets very large and complex. Okay. So, when we talk about, the loss of one organism or something going extinct, I think a lot of times it's like, oh, like whatever, it's not a big deal. It's a big deal. And this is why. So this right here is your biological hierarchy. Okay. You're going to start with atoms. All right. 2 or more atoms gives you a molecule. And when you have molecules, those then make a cell. Now, when you have multicellular organisms, they form a tissue. And tissues are groups of cells that have specific functions and tasks within the body. So you'll hear me talk a lot about form leads to function. You see this with tissues. Now, when you have several tissues, now you get an organ. So if you have eye cells as tissues, many eye cells make an eye. All right? So plants and animals have organs, and these organs are composed of tissues, and these organs have functions. Now, organs, there's more than one, and you have organ systems. So think about your respiratory system. You've got your lungs, you've got your trachea, you've got your diaphragm, you've got multiple organs that are part of that one organ system. All right, so they all communicate, they work together for a common cause. All right, organ systems. Many organ systems make up an organism. So think about us. We're organisms. We have a respiratory system, right, for breathing. We have a cardiovascular system. That's for blood pumping. We've got an integumentary system. That's our skin. All right. We have a musculoskeletal system, muscles, bone. That's what makes an organism. When you've got multiple organisms, That's a population. So each organism is a member of a population, and that is a group of individuals of the same species living and interacting in a shared environment. So all the humans living in your dorm or wherever it is, all the human beings living there, that is a population. Okay, or all the human beings living in Norfolk, city of Norfolk, that's population. Now, when you have an ecological community, all right, that is populations of different species. So you've got your squirrel population, you've got your human population, you've got your bird, your cardinal population, you've got your blue jay population, you've got your populations of all of these different species coming together to make a community. Now, when you keep it going, you've got your ecosystem. All right. And this is a physical environment where all of your communities come together, and that's your ecosystem. All right. And then we get even bigger. Your biome is a large region of the world. So when we're talking about biomes, you've got like Virginia, East Coast. That's like a deciduous rainforest because we have our 4 seasons. Versus if you go to like Hawaii or somewhere that's like more like Pacific tropical. And then the biosphere is this big old rock that we all have to live on together. All right. So this probably looks daunting and scary and crazy. And you're like, how am I supposed to learn all this? Figure it out. You got to know it for the test. It is really not that hard. I have absolute faith that you all will figure this out and get her done. Okay. And yep, there's my little star. You need to know this for the exam, all right? I'm not joking. You got to know it. All right, so saving species. Even though it might seem like, why do we care about saving a species that like we might not even have interaction with? It's important because as you just saw on the previous slide, like there's levels to this, okay? There's a lot of levels. We might not think that, some bird somewhere going extinct is a big deal, but let's say that bird eats a bug that if that bug bites humans, it could kill us. Now that bird's gone, that bug is going to multiply rapidly. Now that bug can bite humans. You see what I mean? Like there's always something. Like we don't argue with nature. We respect her. Okay? So, a big way that stopping extinction has been really important is actually in legislation. And Virginia, being where it's located, you've got Shenandoah. We're part of the Appalachian Mountains. Like, we're just a very natural nature state. And so there's a lot of bans on hunting and bans on fishing within the state, but even within the nation. So whaling was like huge in the early 1900s because whales have oil. People depleted whales and seals for their blubber and their oil and their fat. Another thing too in the Midwest is bison. Now that was more racially charged to kind of deplete the Native American population, but if you ever look into how the bison were just like absolutely depleted in the Midwest, it is terrifying. Like bison were literally hunted to near extinction. So very crazy. Something that is Virginia specific though is these bald eagles. All right. So bald eagles are a huge deal. If you didn't know, they're like the official national bird, or I think they were actually just made the national bird like a few weeks ago. All right, so, but they were going extinct for a while. In Virginia specifically, there was a lot of work being done to make bald eagles a thing again, to bring them back to life, and they were successful. So bald eagles are doing great. You can actually see them a lot here in Hampton Roads. There's quite a few, and they are beautiful. They're huge. So don't get too close. If you have little dogs, then you know. Another thing too is federal and state protections for these creatures. So here in Virginia and in the nation, geese, those Canada geese that like take forever to cross the road, those are federally protected. Please do not go do target practice on geese. You can be arrested for deliberately hurting or killing a goose. Same with snakes, all snakes. Do not kill a snake. If you see a snake in your yard or what, like wherever, either move it because it's probably not poisonous or call animal control. All right? Don't go out here trying to like kumbaya kill stuff, because I promise you it's probably state protected or federal protected. And I don't want any of you guys to go to jail for anything, but especially not for like killing stuff, like animals. Like, please don't do that, okay? Like, this is like my big auntie talk. Don't kill stuff. All right, so sixth extinction. Big deal. All right, we're seeing extinction, depletion of resources, all that stuff. Very scary. At this point, we're just doing a lot of damage control. It's not so much of if, it's really just when. This sixth extinction will happen when we are long gone. So probably our great grandkids are gonna like spite us. They're gonna just like shake their fist at our existence that we made like a crappy world for them. But you know, there's not really too much we can do about it. Okay. Chapter 1 exit ticket. We obviously won't do this because we're virtual. We'll probably start next class with this. So please take notes on this. Make sure you guys come to class ready, on time, 9 o'clock on Monday in WSB 118. I will see you all then. Get your assignments done, and we will do Chapter 1 exit ticket and Chapter 3.